This morning, we're going to be looking at 1 Kings 17. And for the first time, we have copies here of this book that I've been using because if it's called Talk Through the Bible. So I'm cheating and using my own text, you see. So this is a book that looks at every book of the Bible. What is it? 600 and something pages long. I forget how many pages it is, but it's a big book. And it has lots of material that will give you an overview. So we've got them here if anyone wants any. So given that, we're up to 1 Kings 17. And we're jumping from where we were 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, when we were in chapter 12. And that was the demise of the United Kingdom and the loss of that unified vision of what it was intended to be because of sin and corruption that so degraded and brought them down, that there was such a degeneration that was ever evident as a consequence of Solomon's disobedience, and then his own son, and then Rehoboam, and then Jeroboam, and the conflict between them. And then Jeroboam is a man who continues to bring things further and further down. You have a kind of a litany, a kind of a despairing picture of the degeneration, of diminishment, of loss, of degradation, of a moving away from fidelity and hope and purpose to a people who are now thrashing about, trying to flounder, trying to find some hope, some meaning, some purpose that will somehow establish them. There's not enough. And so as a consequence then of their disobedience, God would then warn them about this. And Jeroboam was a man who was in fact being brought up for judgment. And so in this, a prophet then approaches him and warns him about his future situation. I'm not going to go into these chapters, but Ahijah prophesies against the king. And so Jeroboam said to his wife, "Arise now, disguise yourself." And so they're going to be trying to get some kind of an answer to see what is going on. But he warns them and says, actually, that these things will actually occur because of you. Yet I exalted you, because I exalted you from among the people, and made you leader over my people Israel, and tore the kingdom away from the house of David, and gave it to you. Yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and who followed me with all his heart, to do only that which was right in my sight. You also have done more evil than all who were before you, and have gone and made for yourself other gods and molten images to provoke me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I'm bringing calamity on the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male person, both bond and free in Israel. And I will make a clean sweep of the house of Jeroboam, as one sweeps away dung until it is gone. That's a lovely legacy for you to have. So we always think now of Jeroboam being swept away like dung. It's a depressing image, but it's the consequence of the rebellion against God. And so it goes on to say that all Israel will mourn. So as to his son will die, but all Israel will mourn for him. He alone of Jeroboam's family will come to the grave, because in him something good was found toward the Lord our God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam. And moreover, the Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel, who will cut off the house of Jeroboam this day and from now on. So the prophetic warnings were very evident then. And so the consequences of disobedience and obedience become very evident as all these things take place. So you have these high places that go up there. So when you're considering Rehoboam then in chapter 14 as well, or chapter 14:21. So we get you there. So in 14:21, Rehoboam, now son of Solomon, he reigned in Judah. So you have this depressing account, really, of the moral and spiritual decay. But there are episodes, though, where in the southern kingdom of Judah, there are going to be a handful of kings who will do that which is right in God's sight, but they're precious few in their numbers. Rehoboam reigned in Judah, and Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king. He reigned 17 years, the city which the Lord had chosen for all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord. And they provoked him to jealousy more than all their fathers had done, the sins which they committed. They also built for themselves high places and sacred pillars, and Asherim on every high hill and beneath every luxuriant tree. Male cult prostitutes throughout the land, and according to all the abominations of the nations around them. And so all of this would then be brought up, and the Egyptians would take away their treasures, and he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord. And this was part of the judgment of God against these people. So the glory of God, remember, God said, my commitment is not to this temple, but rather to obedience and to my people. I'm a covenant God. But if you walk away from me, it'll be to your own loss. You will actually walk away from the truth and the glory that I have given to you and offered to you, and then seek that in gods and goddesses of your own making, and imitation of the nations around you. So everything was taken, even the shields of gold which Solomon had made. It was all of these things were lost, and so there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. So then Abijah reigns over Judah, and we go back and forth, and we see these kings, and he walked in all the sins of his father which he'd committed before him. His heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God like the heart of his father David. But for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp to raise up a son. So again, God's covenant promises is that with Judah, he's going to there will be a king. There will always be a line, and that line would be, of course, the Messianic line. So there would be an unbroken one dynasty, whereas there were 9 dynasties in the northern kingdom, one murder after another, and one generation after another, and then a new king would come along, which was not part of that lineage. Whereas God kept the thread continued, and it continued all the way to Messiah himself. And so David, because of this, there was war between them, the rest of these acts. And then Asa. Now, Asa is one of those few happy exceptions. It's fascinating to me that often you'll see that unrighteous kings can suddenly have a righteous son, and righteous kings can have unrighteous sons. And so there's no guarantee in that. The idea, though, is that if there is an influence and an impact, it can be transgenerational, but at the same time, there's no assurance of that. And so you see that Jeroboam, then Asa comes to reign as king of Judah, and he reigned 41 years, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And he also put away the male cult prostitutes, and so he removed the idols. He removed this Maacah from his mother from being queen mother, because she had made a horrid image as an Asherah, and he cut down her horrid image and burnt it in the brook of Kidron. But the high places were not taken away. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly devoted to the Lord his God all his days. And so he brought these things into the house. And so there was war between Asa and Baasha. So it just describes that background experience. And then Jehoshaphat succeeds Asa. And Jehoshaphat was another king who did more or less that which was right in the sight of God. And then so forth. It goes on, and you see this back and forth process here. And then prophecies against the kings of the north and the kings of the south in this book. And then we come up to Ahab. Now, Ahab's an intriguing character. So the story of Ahab begins really in chapter 16, verse 29. And here is a great summary of his journey. So this is the man we're going to be dealing with, because we're going to be talking about Elijah. And Elijah, King Ahab, would be the king at this time. And he became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel 22 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So if things weren't bad, they got even worse. And as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worship him. So this calf god, and so serving and worshiping these deities. And it to me it's a depressing vision, really, of these idols that you have for destruction. So that you have these gods and goddesses were unworthy, these false gods. So you had this Astarte and Ashtoreth, lovely woman there. Then you have these figures here, and it's a marvel that men would bow down and worship such things. And that Milcom or Moloch or Moloch, other names for him, was an evil deity, as it were. These gods, which would actually they have like a furnace, and sometimes they would actually offer children and put them inside of them as well. And like in this instance here, so it was a dreadful, hideous image of this corruption and distortion that was characteristic of the idolatry of the people of Israel. So here, though, he makes it even worse. So he made the Asherah. He did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In all his days, then he laid this. So that goes on to talk about he laid the foundations, and this was another prophecy that was fulfilled in this time. But to our chapter, Elijah makes his appearance. Elijah the Tishbite. He was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there will be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Go away from here and turn eastward." So this is first of all, this is an incredible confrontation that Ahab makes with the king. And there's a boldness about him that I find is remarkable. And so with Ahab, there's a sense of mission and call and purpose. I think a man then is a man of conviction and power and purpose, as we'll see. And so he here is an unadulterated, clear, unsullied word from God himself through this bold prophet who confronts the king at his own life's risk, and then he will now have to be protected, or he have to flee, because he would say there would be a consequence to disobedience, and so he predicts this drought that would take place for these years, except by my word. And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Go away from here and turn eastward, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It'll be that when you drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there." So it's an intriguing thing that God provides for his people, and you have this a promise that's made. So he has to restore him, as it were. He has to protect him and preserve him. So here we go, just to give you a little image of this. So here's Samaria here, and the brook Cherith would be on the other side of the Jordan River. And he would be there for a period of time. And then the brook would dry up. So the ravens would feed him. And so you see this imagery here. And then the brook dried up. Why did the brook dry up? Because of his own prophecy. So it's not a surprise that the brook would dry up, because he said, for these years, you're not going to have any rain until the Lord releases it. And so he dries up, and then he goes from this area here, and he works his way up and goes up northwest up to Zarephath. It's north of Tyre. And this is where he has an encounter with the widow. That's where our text will take us next. And so we see this provision. So he makes this confrontation. God protects his servant. And when he drinks of the brook, I've commanded the ravens to provide for you there. So he went. And he lived there for a period of time. They brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. And he would drink from the brook. So things were looking well, but of course the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. So the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Arise, go to Zarephath." So here's God's provision for him along the way, because he's going to have a confrontation with Ahab in the future. And he says, I've commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called her and said, "Please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink." As she was going to get it, he called her and said, "Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I'm gathering a few sticks that I may go and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." Because you see of the famine and so forth in the land. So she thinks this is going to be her last meal. But then he tells her, do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first and bring it out to me. After you may make one for yourself and for your son. It's an interesting thing that a risk is taken before the process can be fulfilled. And so here she is invited to take this risk, a person she hasn't even met before. God's the one who puts them together and brings people together. He is the divine master of ceremonies. And so he spoke to her saying, someone is going to be coming to you. He spoke to him and said, you're going to go to her. So he orchestrates things. How many times do you think you've been encountering people and you thought it was haphazard? And then you realize there was a divine appointment going on, that there was something more than that. I think you need to look at this. Don't take things in a cavalier manner. Sometimes people call you. Sometimes you're prompted by the Spirit to call. And you need to listen to that prompt, because there will be times when God's behind it. And when you obey, then the next thing will happen. But if you do not obey, if you do not respond, then no more light will be given to you. And so God makes this provision both for her and for him. But at the same time, they need to hear the voice of the Lord and respond in appropriate ways, because responsiveness is the key thing to it all. So he said, don't fear, and make me this cake and then bring it. So thus says the Lord of God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah. And she and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah. And so this provision, this supernatural provision, would be there for them. So once again, you have God's caring for his people and delivering them and providing for them in ways that would be unpredicted. Why would he go away from here, from the whole area around Gad, and then go across up to the northwest, and then go up to there? And then later he'll be having a confrontation with the priests on Mount Carmel. So God has a plan, a course, a direction, a plan for all of us. And in his case, he has to listen to the voice of the living God and respond to it accordingly in this way. Then we see another scene that has to do with the widow's son. And so after this provision, it came about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick, and his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, what have I have to do with you, O man of God? You've come to me to bring my iniquity to remembrance and put my son to death. Always interesting how we take this mindset. We're the victims, you see. Here God provides for her, and he's been making her survive with this miraculous provision. You notice that you'd get impressed when they notice the bowl of flour never empties. You notice that the oil is always there. Does that tell you something? What does that remind you of? Think about a provision that they took for granted. The manna in the wilderness. Every day it was a miracle that was being done, that God would provide for this 2.5 million or so people for these 38 years of wilderness wanderings. It was an astonishment that this would happen. And there would be the manna in the morning, and they'd say, what is it? So that's what it means. It means what? What is this stuff? But it must have been the finest food ever consumed by men, because it was a perfect food. Apparently it sustained them. It's all they needed for all that time. And he provided, but guess what happened? They took it for granted, and he gave them quail as well. And he provided them with the water. But then they complained to God, the one who's providing for them, holding their lives together, and said, we're tired of this. We want something better. It's never enough, you see. So it's the same mindset here. Here, a miracle takes place every day, that the flour is not diminished and the oil is not reduced. And yet they still take it for granted, and then get the high hand and say, you've come now to judge me here. But he says to her, give me your son. Then he took him from her bosom and carried him up to the upper room where he was living. And he laid him on his own bed. And he called to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, why have you also brought calamity to the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him." And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. He took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." Then you hear her response. Then she said, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth. In your mouth is truth." I don't know what she was thinking before, but she's now pretty convinced that that's the case. So we go back to this image here where he brings her down from the upper room there, and she is provided for. So this we have this incredible confrontation with the king. And I find this is fascinating because James 5:17 also gives us a bit of a comment on this. So let's take a look at James 5:17 for a moment, because it describes Elijah in these terms. It says, Elijah was a man, effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much, James writes. Then uses Elijah as an illustration of this very principle. He was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the earth for 3 years and 6 months. Then he prayed again, and we'll see that coming up in the confrontation that takes place in Carmel. Prayed again, and the sky poured rain, and the earth produced its fruit. So this an allusion that James has to a man of how that God, the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. And this is part of the principle that I wanted to give to you. So as I see it, then God gives him. He commands him to go. He is given then a promise that he will be provided for, and then he responds, and then he rests. And as Howard Hendricks put it, I came across his little book. It's a small little book it's on Elijah, conflict, crisis, and courage. But it's a terrific little summary. And I've really picked up this phrase from him: revelation demands a response. And that concept has always been meaningful to me, because it's one thing to read the scriptures. The real key in scripture, though, is what you do with it. This is why, as I see it, that there is this whole idea of knowledge, understanding, experience, and action or response. And I see that this is a sequence, but as I look at it this way, it's one thing to know something in scripture. You may have read and studied the book of Job. It's another thing to have an understanding of the principles in the book of Job, and to grasp that the book is not so much about suffering as it is about the actual sovereignty of God, and the realization that you can never have the right to even ask him a why, because you wouldn't understand the fringe of his ways, but rather you're called to trust him and not understand him. And that is what his calling is to there as well. You may even understand that principle. That's move from knowledge to understanding. Third, you may have a Job-like experience. I'm sure none of you will have that. It's a dangerous book to study, by the way. And I don't know if you've had that experience, but every time I go through the book of Job, something happens. And but I will tell you this, though. You're almost inviting trouble when you read the book of Job, and yet you're actually inviting grace. Because what you're doing really is exposing yourself again to a new principle you didn't have before. And you realize you're going to be open to the purposes of God, and that he always redeems what he allows in your life, though we do not want it. Remember, he tells us to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks. Now think of those 3 words: rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks. They're ongoing images. And everything give thanks means there are going to be things you're invited to thank God for you don't want to thank him for. Is that correct? Friend of mine in Covington just discovered that his wife has cancer. And she has pancreatic cancer. He just discovered this last week. And so we're processing that. How can I thank God? How can he thank God for that when he's been given? So, of course, what he does is he reaches out to people he knows will pray for him, who will support him, because we become tangible manifestations of people who are there for another man. And so we rejoice when another rejoices, and we weep when another weeps, as it is. So I'm seeking to minister to him and comfort him. But his hard work is this: to thank God, not because of the cancer, but because what the cancer can do. You see, that could not be apparently brought about in any other way. It is not that we rejoice in the situation, because it's always a painful thing, and we know this. When you consider then two texts that are so central to this understanding that all of us need to wrestle with these again and again. The first one is Romans 5:3. We exult in our tribulations, he tells us, not because he's a spiritual masochist, but because of what God can do in them and through them. Knowing that I can result because of what it's going to produce, that it'll bring about perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope. Biblical hope doesn't disappoint. The hope of this world will. Put your hope in something God didn't promise, and it'll let you down for sure. But only hope in the things that God has promised, and you will not be then disappointed, because ultimately he will deliver what he promises. But he does not promise a pain-free life. In fact, he promises that those who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. That's a guarantee. And the more serious you get about it, the more opposition you're going to encounter. So we can know that. So this is a matter of courage, of obedience, of risk-taking. It's not just theoretical. This is not just for your head. This has to go to your heart. And you have to embrace this personally, experientially, and relationally. And so this hope, God's hope, doesn't disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Now note what he just said. We rejoice in our tribulation. Tribulation brings about perseverance, perseverance, proven character, hope. And then compare that with James 1, when he tells us the same thing. Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. You rejoice, not because you like them, but knowing, this is Paul says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. There he said persecution, rather perseverance. But here you have endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect. The word means mature and complete, lacking in nothing. Because there are going to be certain advanced courses that are required for a person to move on into maturity, so that we rejoice then in the things that God has given to us. And so we learn to do that. You may have, so in my friend's case, and in my own case, as I pray for my own bride, Karen, I have to be grateful that God has provided for her, and be thankful that it's a hard Thanksgiving. I would like her to be well. I do whatever I can do to try to help her in that. But at the end of the day, it's in God's good hands. And it's also at the end of the day, you live long enough, you're going to be sure you're going to die of your last disease. It's a guarantee. It's a guarantee. You will die of your last disease. You may not get this one here, but then it'll get you in the end. And so it's a matter of then of having an experience, but then it's not enough to just have the experience. It's this application that's the most important thing of the four. Because you see, you may have a Job-like experience, but if you don't apply it and lean on the hand of God and hope in him, and learn that he shall be your hope, and he shall be your strength. He will be your source. So application is when you bring it to heart, when you put it in practice, when you apply it, meaning that you learn to to thank God in your adversities and thank God in your joys, because you know that he has a purpose and you're in his grip, and we're in a broken and fallen world, and that we are also called to bear our cross, and that we are to complete what is lacking in Christ's afflictions, as Paul describes it, and that we also can be participants and fellow heirs. And so, but we're also heirs of what he's provided for us in the adversities as well as in the good. So knowledge, understanding, experience, and application. This is really the message that I think that. So, one of the principles that Hendricks noted is that God ministered to Elijah before he ministered through him. That's something worth knowing about too. Sometimes he has to build up his servant and prepare them for the point in which they will be used. And you do not know what that'll look like. So you need to be ready, but you need to be an agent who will be changed. And again, some other notes that I took that I wanted you to see. The world is convinced only by that which it cannot produce. So one of the things that you see in your own life journey then is that you admire and note well when you see something that's inexplicable apart from the grace of God. What is it in your life? Is there anything in your life that you cannot explain on any other basis than the supernatural? Hendricks asks, and I think that's a good question. Is there something in your life that you cannot account for apart from the grace of God and the supernatural grace of God? And then the idea of another phrase I like is his aliveness in your life. That how alive is he to you at this time in your life? And that he wants your availability. It's not just that he wants you to work, but rather he wants you to be available for his good work. And you don't know what that will look like. And one of the things that Elijah was he was a man who was convinced of the resources which were available to him. And he was convinced of the reality of God. Because of that conviction and that conviction that he knew the reality of God, he was a man who lived a life that demanded an explanation. And this is, I think, a thing for all of us, that I think we're all called. We all have our spheres of influence. Some are broader and larger, some smaller. He calls us to faithfulness in the small things. He was faithful in a very little thing, will also be faithful in much. Righteous in a little thing. He was unrighteous in a little, unfaithful in a little thing, will be unfaithful in much. Who was righteous in a small thing will be righteous in much. So that good and evil both increase at compound interest. And the reality is that we're called to be faithful to the knowledge, the truth that we have. And when God nudges you and he gives you a truth, you need to apply it. He has 1,000 ways of getting your attention until you do learn it. You see, there's all kinds of ways. Remember that phrase that we've used so many times? God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience. He shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse the deaf world. Why do I like to repeat that? Because you see, wouldn't it be smart for you to listen to his whispers first? How many of us are truly amazed and have the why of gratitude? Why have you been so good to me? How often do we thank him? What have I done that you've been so good? We only seem to notice God when things are down. You would be wise and well to actually perceive his graces, the small graces that he lavishes upon you, and do not ever take them as your due, but recognize it is the grace of God. And the more you are grateful, because grateful is, in fact, gratitude is a virtue that must be cultivated. And you must choose the way of gratitude, and you choose the way of contentment rather than a mindset that is diminished because of infidelity and because we're living by circumstances rather than by convictions. So God calls us then to take risks. Then there will be times when he'll speak to us in our conscience. But it'd be wise to learn from these things. Wisdom means that you will be staying off dead-end streets. It's the art of staying off dead-end streets. But there will be times, no matter what, even when you're obeying God, that there are going to be some adversaries that will come. Adversities will come, persecutions, pushbacks, setbacks, because that's exactly what will happen. But God will sustain you in that as well. He calls you to a mission. He calls you to actually to be bold in your sphere of influence and to do something that is a manifestation of the presence of God in you that becomes an authoritative, makes you an authoritative presence, that there is something, a moral substance about you, that there is a gravitas, a weight, a glory about you. And he desires you to be men of excellence, men who aren't mediocre, men who don't go with the crowds, the men who go contrary to the call of this culture. My phrase that I use so frequently, any dead fish can float downstream. And how many people are floating downstream? And then to see a person, you see a salmon going against the tide. Something's going on there. How is that going against the current? And then goes up. It still amazes me how these things are capable of leaping and finding actually where they were spawned. It's amazing. It's just what time mutations and natural selection will do. The time and chance. Come on. We're surrounded with mystery and wonder. God's evident grace and glory is around us, and we fail to even notice it. So this is one of the reasons why you need to have a seeing eye, that you have to see the glory of God and to realize as well, even the glory of the grind, as it's called. The glory of the grind is to realize most of life is lived in the valley and not in the mountains, the valley of vision. And it's in this valley that we actually realize, as we prayed earlier. And then so I'm going to repeat this prayer, that we learn by paradox that the way down is the way up, that to be low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart, that the contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit. This we learn not only in the lives of the great saints in the history of the church and going back to the Hebrew Bible and the Greek New Testament, but we learn this as well in people in our own lives, as we can see that the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that we, with contrition, we come before the King of Kings, the divine majesty, with a sense of awe and humility and receptivity. He says, have nothing is to possess all, to realize that you are all I need, that to bear the cross is to wear the crown, that it is necessary for us, indeed, then for us to suffer before the glory will follow, to humble ourselves before we will be exalted. To give to is to receive, that the valley is the place of vision. And so in this world, in this valley of vision, I've given you one exercise that I wanted you to continue to use. And I've been doing this now for the last couple of weeks. And this relates to this very matter of the man you are. The man you are going to be today is going to be defined by your answer to these questions. And then you develop a thing and you continue to become more and more that person as you go. But remember these three questions I'm inviting you now to use throughout the day. And that first question is the first question in John's gospel. And only John has these first and last questions. What do you seek? And that'll define everything. What are you looking for? What do you long for? So here you ask yourself right now, what do I want right now more than anything else in the world? And is it worthy of me? Is it big enough? Because if it's not transfinite and transtemporal, it's not worthy of your worship. We worship and serve the creature more than the creator. And that is what happens with the reversion constantly back to the Asherim and the Baalim and so forth. It's the folly of worshiping the creation rather than the creator who made all things. So my answer I want my answer to be, what do I seek? I seek you, Lord. Because that's only where I'm going to find my true satisfaction. You've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. You'll find it nowhere else. Therefore, then I ask, who am I? I do this very quickly. No, it's a process now, recalibrating. I can be talking with somebody, I can be thinking about something, and sometimes I'll just raise this question. Very powerful. Who do you say? Who is Jesus to you right now? So not only what do you seek, but do you have a growing vision, a desire to know him better, have a clearer picture of who he is? Who is he? Well, who do you say I am? Is he indeed the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the ruler of all things, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end? Is he indeed all these things that the scriptures describe of him? Because when we see a vision of Jesus, then we know that we have a picture of someone we can know and love and pursue and call upon. And that to me is really the whole key here. So when I think of Jesus, he shall be called Advocate, Lamb of God, the resurrection and the life, Shepherd and Bishop of souls. He's the Judge. He's the Lord of lords. He's the Man of sorrows. He's the head of the church. He's the Master. He's the faithful and true witness, the rock, the high priest, the door, the living water. Look, what are these images doing for you? They, as you look at scripture, you realize all these beautiful metaphors are beyond description, because no one of these could be. He is the I am. He is the King of Kings. And so when I ask this question then of what do I seek? Who do you say I am then? I want to have the grace of a growing vision of Jesus, not just in my head, but in my heart. I want to have a sense of his presence, because he is in you and you are in him. And then third, do you love me more than these? Fill in the blank. Do you love him more than your grandchildren or your children or your spouse or your friends or your career, your fame, your wealth, your notoriety, your accomplishments, your legacy? Do you love him more than the things that men love? Because most people's loves are not sufficient. They love too little. And you must love so much that only he can sustain it. You must pursue him in such a way that only he can satisfy your heart. Do you love me more than these? And then the other side, I'm going to make a card. Basically, this will be one side. The other card's going to be this. You've seen this before, haven't you? But I want this to be a part of you. And so I now have find myself alternating between these three things through the course of the day. And I find it to be very interesting to do. So if you stop and think about it then, what do I seek right now? Who is he to me? And do I want him, and do I seek him more than anything else? And if I cannot say yes, do I want him more than anything else? So it's a recalibrator, isn't it? It's a way of reflecting. Remember that phrase that how C.S. Lewis put it? He said, Christianity is a statement which, if it is true, is of infinite importance. Stop there for a moment. If this stuff is true, there could be no more important. It's the only vision. It's your only hope. Because people are not basically good. But if you admit that, you're in despair unless you have the good news of the gospel. You see, because he is your hope. So you wrestle with these things and you ask, how can I really trust in him? But if he is the one, then he's called me then to hope in him and to trust in him, and he shall be your hope. So Lewis goes on to say, if it is false, it is of no importance. So if it's true, it's of infinite importance. If it's false, it's of no importance. Now, where is he going to go? The next part. The one thing it is not, it cannot be, is moderately important. I say that the majority, even of churchgoers, live it as if it's moderately important. It's just a part, a component. I'll put it on when I need it. When things are going well, I got the wheel. You never had the wheel. You're out of control right now. You don't control 1 minute, 1 second of your life. And you know how your life has been. Some of you have been, and I know that's been true with me. A second here, a minute, a foot there. I wouldn't be here. And you don't even know the times in which God spared your life. You're not even aware that something was about to hit you, but he diverted that because it was not your time. So when I say that if you are pursuing the will of God, you'll be immortal until his will is accomplished. You have been given that time. But let me tell you, you don't control a darn thing. And God controls everything. Furthermore, you don't even know what's best for you, though you love to think you do. That's why you wrestle with God as well, because he always seems to have an idea of what your best good looks like that's different than yours. But I don't want it that way. I want it this way. But he says, what you want to have, though, you want to see what it looks like? What if God could show you, here, let me show you what it looks like. It's a dead end. And then you have the privilege of going back after you go to the wrong exit and you've gone 5 miles out of your way, then you go back where you started from. Wouldn't it be smart to stay off dead end streets? So the whole idea, one thing it cannot be is moderately important. It's either all or nothing. And I think that's why we wrestle with God, because it reveals our trials reveal our heart. And they reveal what we really long for, what we really hope in, and our responses too. So my takeaway from this is to seek him first and foremost, to choose the way of gratitude for what God's given you. Choose the way of contentment because he is there for you. Choose the way of hope because he will be there to receive you. And that to me is, those are the words of a man who then applying them can be an overcomer, even in the midst of the adversities of this frail life, because we're heading for home.